What does it mean to win a war and still lose a nation? In 1966, Nigeria was barely 6 years old, and it was already bleeding. Coups, massacres, an entire people fleeing for their lives. A country that the British had stitched together from over 250 different ethnic groups was now ripping itself apart at the seams. Into that fire walked a quiet, devout 31-year-old army officer from the Nigerian Middle Belt. His name was Yakubu Gowon. He never campaigned for power. He never schemed for the top. Power simply arrived, dropped into his hands by a military in crisis, desperate for a man that all sides could live with. For 13 years, he would hold Nigeria together through its darkest chapter. And then, in one of history's great ironies, he would lose it all to the very same forces he had spent his career fighting: corruption, complacency, and the slow rot of power. This is the story of Yakubu Gowon. Welcome to Legacy Legends TV. Yakubu Gowon was born on the 19th of October 1934 in a small town called Vanquished in what is today Plateau State, the heart of Nigeria's Middle Belt. His father was an Anglican catechist, a man of faith, discipline, and community. Gowon grew up in that same mold, quiet, principled, and deeply religious. He was not a man of grand ambitions. He was a man of duty. He joined the Nigerian army in 1954, when it was still under British command. He was disciplined, intelligent, and showed enough promise to be sent to Sandhurst, Britain's most prestigious military academy, the same institution that had trained officers of the British Empire for over 2 centuries. By 1960, when Nigeria gained independence, Gowon was already a commissioned officer. By 1963, he was gaining experience in UN peacekeeping operations in the Congo. By 1966, he was a lieutenant colonel, relatively young, relatively unknown outside military circles. He was not supposed to become head of state. But Nigeria had other plans. January 15th, 1966. Nigeria's first military coup. A group of mostly Igbo officers seized power, assassinating Prime Minister Abubakar Tafawa Balewa and several senior northern political figures. The North was outraged. Many saw it not as a political coup, but as an Igbo takeover. 6 months later, northern officers struck back. A counter-coup. General Aguiyi Ironsi, who had taken power after the January coup, was killed. And now Nigeria's military was fractured along ethnic lines. Igbo officers on one side, Hausa Fulani and northern officers on the other. Then came the pogroms. Across the north, Igbo civilians were hunted, killed, and driven from their homes. Tens of thousands died. Over 1 million fled south in terror, arriving in the eastern region with nothing but the clothes on their backs and stories of horror. The country needed someone all factions could accept. Someone with no ethnic score to settle. Someone from the Middle Belt, Christian enough for the South, Northern enough for the North. Someone, in short, like Yakubu Gowon. On the 1st of August 1966, at just 31 years old, Yakubu Gowon became Nigeria's supreme commander and head of state. He was now in charge of a country that was one spark away from full civil war. He spent months negotiating. He met with the Eastern region's military governor, a charismatic, defiant officer named Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu. The talks collapsed. On the 30th of May 1967, Ojukwu declared the Eastern region an independent nation, the Republic of Biafra. Gowon had no choice. On the 6th of July 1967, Nigeria went to war with itself. The Nigerian Civil War, or the Biafra War, depending on which side of history you stand, lasted 30 months. It was one of the bloodiest conflicts on African soil in the 20th century. Biafra was initially defiant. Ojukwu's forces made early advances, even pushing into the Midwest region. The world was watching. Some nations, France, Haiti, Ivory Coast, recognized Biafra and covertly supplied it with arms. The propaganda from the Biafran side was devastatingly effective. Images of starving children, swollen bellies, mass suffering, broadcast into living rooms across Europe and North America. Gowon's federal government imposed a blockade, cutting off food and supplies to Biafra as a military strategy. His government called it a necessary tactic of war. Critics called it a weapon of mass starvation. The result, whatever the intent, was a humanitarian catastrophe. Children died. Entire communities were hollowed out by hunger. Britain and the Soviet Union, unusual allies, both backed the federal government with weapons and logistics. Nigeria had oil. The Western powers had interests. And so a war that was fundamentally about identity, territory, and ethnic survival was also inevitably a Cold War sideshow. Month by month, Biafra shrank. The federal forces at Panay, better supplied, better funded, fighting on home terrain, ground the secessionist republic down. Town by town, road by road, the territory fell. On the 13th of January 1970, Biafra surrendered. Ojukwu had already fled into exile in Ivory Coast. His deputy, Philip Effiong, signed the instruments of surrender. The war was over. The human cost remains disputed to this day. Conservative estimates say 1 million dead. Some historians put the figure at 2 million or higher. Most of them civilians, most of them victims of starvation rather than bullets. The scars of that war have never fully healed in Nigeria's national memory. Here is where Gowon did something that the world did not expect. He chose mercy. His declared policy after the war was 4 simple words: no victor, no vanquished. There were no war crimes trials. There were no public executions of Biafran commanders. Ojukwu's officers were reintegrated into the Nigerian military. Igbo civil servants who had lost their positions during the war were restored. The federal government launched a major reconstruction program for the war-devastated East. Roads, hospitals, schools. Compare this to how most civil wars end anywhere in the world. And you begin to understand how genuinely unusual this was. Gowon could have crushed the Igbo politically for a generation. He chose not to. He chose reconciliation over retribution. For this, Yakubu Gowon deserves a permanent place in the history of African leadership. He held Nigeria together, and then offered the defeated side not punishment, but a hand back into the nation. For a few years after the war, Nigeria experienced something it had never really known: genuine national optimism. And then came the oil. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo shocked the world. Prices quadrupled overnight. For oil-producing nations like Nigeria, it was a jackpot beyond imagination. Petrodollars flooded in. Nigeria's revenue exploded. Gowon's finance minister, Kalu Idika Kalu, famously declared that Nigeria's problem was not money, but how to spend it. They found ways. Corruption, already present, became systemic. Contracts worth billions were awarded to well-connected individuals. Infrastructure projects were launched with fanfare and abandoned halfway. The government hosted Festac, the Second World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture, in 1977, spending lavishly on a celebration of African identity while millions of Nigerians lacked clean water and reliable electricity. And Gowon himself? He had promised a return to democratic civilian rule. First by 1974, then he canceled it, saying Nigeria was not ready. The date kept shifting. The military had become comfortable. too comfortable. And Gowon, the humble catechist's son who had once been the reluctant leader, had grown into power in a way that blinded him to what was happening around him and beneath him. Nigeria was drifting. The people could feel it. And Gowon's inner circle was too busy enjoying the oil wealth to care.
On the 29th of July 1975, Gowon was attending the Organization of African Unity Summit in Kampala, Uganda, representing Nigeria on the continental stage, when the radio broadcast the news. He had been overthrown. Brigadier Murtala Muhammad had seized power in Lagos. Not a shot was fired in Gowon's defense. His own officers had simply decided it was time. He accepted his removal with quiet dignity, as he had accepted everything else in his life, without drama, without vengeance. He went into exile in Britain. He earned a doctorate in political science from the University of Warwick. He returned to Nigeria eventually, never imprisoned, never tried, treated with the respect that his role in ending the Civil War had earned him. So what is the final verdict on Yakubu Gowon? He kept Nigeria one. That is no small thing. In a moment when the country could have shattered into pieces and never recovered, he held it together, through war, through grief, through international pressure, and then offered the other side not punishment, but peace. That is genuine greatness. But he also presided over the birth of Nigeria's oil curse. The years of his rule saw the foundations of systemic corruption pour deep into the country's institutions. He promised democracy and delayed it. He governed with urgency in war and with dangerous comfort in peace. Yakubu Gowon is, in the end, a man of real greatness and real failure, which may be the most Nigerian story of all. A nation of extraordinary promise, always caught between what it could be and what it too often becomes. The general who won the Civil War and then lost Nigeria. If this legend unsettled you, subscribe now to Legacy Legends TV for more untold African mysteries hidden deep within history. And tell me in the comments, Yakubu Gowon, the general who won the Civil War and then lost Nigeria.